There we go. Official. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Armatage Neighborhood Association Green Team's panel on soil health and regenerative agriculture. My name is Lauren Anderson. I'm the coordinator for the Armatage neighborhood, and due to one of our volunteers having unfortunately a family emergency, I'll be moderating our discussion tonight. So I want to extend a warm welcome to each of you. We're so glad you're here, especially on a night when I know that there's a lot of other workshops happening. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers tonight. They'll be sharing their experience with local food systems, with regenerative agriculture, and soil health. You'll get to learn what's happening around Minnesota, how they're working to protect soil health and what we can do locally and even within our own yards, even though a lot of us are coming from the city of Minneapolis tonight. This event is the second in the Green Team Soil Health Series, which grew kind of out of our desire to find some hope for climate change in the face of anxiety and uncertainty. So if you haven't had a chance yet to view the groundbreaking film, Kiss the Ground, we hope you'll do so. You got a link when you signed up here for this panel tonight, because hope for climate change is under our feet and in our soil. We have lots of information to cover tonight, so I'm going to ask that we keep ourselves on mute and that questions come in via the chat window until after the panelists have each had a chance to share. So we'll kind of give 20 minutes per panelist and then plenty of time for questions at the end. Your device's Zoom app should have a chat button at the bottom, so you can tap that to ask questions, and I'll help our speakers get to as many of the questions as possible. And sorry for those beeps that keep coming in. Those are just more of our guests joining us today for the workshop. Fingers crossed our workshop tonight will be recorded so we can share it with more of our community. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers. First up, we have Dawn and Grant Breitkreitz, and they run Stony Creek Farm near Redwood Falls. Since taking ownership, they have converted a conventional crop and cow/calf operation into a multi-enterprise regenerative family business. They use some, quote, unconventional techniques, including a 3-crop rotation in their 100% no-till cropping system, and have managed intensive cattle grazing throughout their pasture systems. Second up will be Martin Larsen, who is a 5th-generation farmer from Byron, Minnesota. Martin grows conventional corn and soybeans in a full no-till system with almost 100% cover crops. In the last 3 years, he's integrated food-grade oats into his rotation to add some diversity. He also works for the Olmsted Soil and Water Conservation District, where he does research on cover crops and nitrate reduction in groundwater. And then our third speaker will be Grace Root of Homegrown Minneapolis. So Grace works right here for the city of Minneapolis. Homegrown Minneapolis is a citywide initiative to expand our community's ability to grow, process, distribute, eat, and compost more healthy, sustainable, locally grown foods by bringing together key partners from local government, area businesses, community organizations, nonprofits, and residents. So with all of that intro, we are going to let Dawn and Grant kick us off.
All right, see if we can make this work. Can you see that?
Not quite yet. Let me make sure I've got.
We've had trouble in the past with this, so let me know if it comes up.
Will do. Don't see it yet, but screen share is enabled and ready to go. So hopefully we'll get this.
Maybe if I back out and take a look at this again.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. How's that look?
That looks beautiful.
All right. You're up.
Okay. So Grant and Dawn Breitkreitz from Redwood Falls, Minnesota. We farm northwest of town here along the Minnesota River. You can see by this picture we're on some pretty rolly land, lots of creeks, streams, and the river to contend with here on our farm. We got the opportunity to start out in 1997. My dad had made a promise to my mom when they turned 50 years old that they would reassess life at 50 years old, and their decision was to quit farming. and they quit. My dad bought a truck, went coast to coast, and then came back to local hauling. Did not help us at all. Wasn't around, no advice, no concerns or anything back and forth to us, and it gave us a great opportunity to do things a little bit different. We started out in what I would call the very conventional world, doing full tillage spring and fall, full herbicide, full insecticide program. I mean, all the latest and greatest seed technologies that were coming, and I was adapting them and using them. And through the course of a lot of years, we changed our operation. But the first side of it that we learned about was on pasture land and grazing. That first picture Dawn had up there, that striped gopher in the middle wasn't even happy. There isn't enough cover to hide from predators. And through managed intensive grazing and lots of travel and study, we figured out how to quadruple the production on our grazing lands for our cows. This particular picture, this grass never got over boot high, and it never got over boot high using full fertilizer program and full herbicide program. And then we figured out to manage the cattle differently, and eliminated all the sides that we were using, and so this is what we grow now for forage, without fertilizer, without herbicide, just managing the cows and letting Mother Nature do what she does best. So these are full grown adult cows going into this pasture. Our grazing system mimics nature. We mimic what the bison and the big herds did before mankind got here, and we put fences up and roads up and everything. So when the bison moved through, they were pushed by predators or weather, storms, whatever moved them. So they'd come through an area in huge, dense groups of livestock, lots of hoof action on the soil, and then they'd move on. So this is that same picture we just showed of our cows going in there. That's stuff that was all the way up to the top of them. And this is what it looks like. We're in there for one day, usually, and we leave. Tramples down a tremendous amount of cover onto the soil. That cover that goes down to the soil is our fertilizer and our herbicide program. It's on the soil, so the biology in the soil can convert it into nutrients needed to keep fortifying the grasses and forbs that are out there.
That sounds amazing. You know, I'm realizing that I don't think our picture advanced, and I cannot wait to see.
Okay, I'll slow down a little bit. Sorry.
Oh no problem. We are seeing we're seeing your cover slide, and I'm wondering if
Oh no.
Uh-oh.
no, that's
Oops. Let's go back. You're still seeing the cover slide. Okay, let me escape out of this again. Maybe we'll just do it this way.
that would be perfect. We can see
Okay,
that.
so that was the first slide that he talked about, where there wasn't enough grass. This is the one, this is what our pasture looks like now. That's how we've changed it through management. And then this was just an example of what the herds looked like, of bison or elk or whatever going through. And then this slide is what it looks like after we have our cattle done in that one paddock for a day. Okay, and so now we're here. And this picture is actually of a farm field that we've converted to pasture land. And we used to farm this conventionally, and we collect crop insurance probably 5 out of 7 to 10 years. And we'd kind of given up on it, and we decided we were just going to plant it to alfalfa and hope that we get like 2 cuttings a year or something like that. And the alfalfa field was like aging out, and we were starting to get a little bit of grass coming in there and stuff. And so we decided to do kind of a giant experiment for us, and we decided to see what we could do with the cattle and see if we could convert it to pasture just using the cattle without seeding anything else on this field. And I'll let him continue the story on that.
So in agriculture, there's what's called a latent seed bank. So you can imagine 100+ years of tillage on here, all the latest herbicides and fertilizers on here. And I thought these people were crazy talking about a latent seed bank in the soil. So I decided to try this with the cows, and I watched the cows graze the alfalfa, but I was really watching the native grasses that were coming back underneath the alfalfa, and we'd only let the cows clip half of them off and move the cows out. And we turned this piece of land into this without any additional seed expense. It took some time, but it was a tremendous, it is probably one of the most productive, profitable pieces of land that we currently manage. So while we did this with the cows, obviously we're on a lot of rolly land here, and we had swamps and bogs that we couldn't ever graze. And all of a sudden it kind of hit us that, okay, how come we can graze cows through these swamps and bogs now? It's not because we're in a dry year. It's because we're actually infiltrating the rainfall where it's hitting the soil instead of running down into these low areas. So we had obviously done great strides in our cattle operation as far as productivity, production, healthier cattle, happier workers.
Yes.
And we thought, why aren't we doing this on a row crop operation? So for those of you that don't get out to Southwest Minnesota, this is very, very common in our area. I've been here on this farm my entire life. I never saw this in my lifetime until the last about 15 years. This happens every year, dirt blowing, tremendous amounts of dirt blowing. You know, the snert, they call it, it's here all the time. And I mean, it just melted off now, and you can see topsoil in the road ditches. So through all this, we learned to abide by 6 principles that we run our grazing operation, our row crop operation, our whole ecosystem by. And the first one is keep the soil covered at all times. And that's hard to do when we're growing corn and soybeans, but it's something we work at. Obviously in the pastures it is, but if we overgraze, we're not keeping the soil covered all the time. So we got to manage the grazing properly, minimize disturbance. Part of that is by not keeping cover on it in a pasture situation. But for us in the row crop area, it's we're 100% no-till, which 10 years ago, we took a big leap of faith, switching the last crop to that. So that minimized our disturbance, increased the diversity of what we're growing. We used to just grow corn, soy, and wheat. Now we've got a list of crops. I don't know what it is, 12, 13 different crops that we grow now. So we increased our diversity, keep the living root in the soil at all times, if at all possible. We've worked on that. We got a pretty good system working right there. Our farm is actually greening up already right now as the little bit of snow melted away. And integrate livestock, which was easy for us because we've got the cattle. And the biggest thing that we struggled with the whole time on this was the context of doing things. We'd go to a convention or conference, and I'd come home and I'd say, oh, this is the latest, greatest thing. And we'd go 2 whole hog in it. And it cost us some money and probably some time and a lot of frustration over the years. So this is what our farm looks like on the top left, the aggregation in the soil. The bottom right is what we used to look like, and we can step across any fence line to our neighbors, and that's what the topsoil looks like. The aggregates in the soil, that nice
chocolate cake or cottage cheese
looking type soil, that's what we want to see. But those aggregates, the aggregate stability is only there for about 28 days if we don't have a living root in there to keep feeding that stability. And so that's why the living root in the soil is so important all the time. And obviously tillage will break up all those pore spaces and aggregates for us. So one of the ways we do this is through cover crops. When we're not growing active cash crop, we make sure we got a cover crop growing all the time. We've figured out ways to integrate cover crops into our cash crops. This is a little side-by-side of a soil pit and a cover crop plot that we had on the farm here. You can see on the left, that's a tillage radish going down. The roots are over 30 inches deep. If you wash with water, they're probably down 4 to 5 feet deep. You know, this is just visual looking, and there's a cover crop on the right that's only down 17 inches. So we use all these different cover crops to do different things for us, to break compaction, keep that aggregate stability, move, translocate nutrients up, put them into a usable form for our cash crops. We use them for lots of different things. And the big one is to keep the soil covered. So we're doing something that's not seen very often here in Minnesota. This is called planting green. We are planting corn in this picture to be harvested for grain or silage for our cattle operation. That's a live living cover crop that was planted the year previous, overwintered, was grazed once by our cattle, and then left to get to that maturity. There are many, there's about 7 or 8 different things that made it through the winter there to harvest and hold nutrients for us and stop wind and soil erosion and aggregate stability, all that type of stuff. How do we do this in our row crop operation? This is a couple pictures of some grain drills. These would normally be used to seed small grains
Or soybeans
in 6, 7.5, 10, 8, 10-inch rows. And we just take some row units off and convert them so that we can go through and plant our cover crops in our growing crop of corn. And this is what it looks like. So before the corn canopy gets tall and shades the rows, we've got a live living root, multiple different species in there growing in between our corn. The corn shades it for about 60 days in complete darkness, and then we take the corn off, and this is what we have. We've got a beautiful cover crop to do all the different principles that we talked about. We do this planting soybeans also. This particular picture was actually grazed twice by cattle when we were out of feed, and it was one of those 18, 19 springs that, you know, spring didn't come till the 1st of June, and then it was summer, and we'd run out of forage and needed a place to go with our cows. So we grazed this twice, and then we planted soybeans right before, or as we needed to, and harvested a wonderful crop.
Skipped one.
So if we don't have a cover crop growing in our cash grain crops, right here we're finishing up combining soybeans, and the no-till drill is running right beside us, putting in another cover crop to get it started before the ground freezes for the winter. Dawn wanted me to talk a little bit about this. Diversity is unbelievable.
We use this as a soil health building tool, I guess I'd say. We try to set aside at least 10% of the acres that we have here on the farm to intensely grow cover crops on it. We take a forage off, and then we put a full season cover crop, multiple species. Like this is probably 14 to 18 species on it, just to give the biology a really big boost and just harvest as much nutrients as we can from the sun and get that pumping down into the biology in the soil. And the benefit of this is that later on, we actually graze it with the cattle, and that adds some, you know, additional nutrients and that sort of thing for the, not only the, well, for the biology basically, and it builds fertility for us for the next year. So this is what that looks like in the fall. This is obviously frozen, at least, well, this probably froze like 3 times or whatever. So some of it is frozen, but there's still some green living plants in there. And so we go through there and we put fence posts in, and then we graze it, we strip graze it with our cattle, just like we would manage our pasture.
So this, like Dawn said, we try to do a certain percentage of our land each year to do this, but at the time we did this first big field was about the time our governor wanted us to set aside buffer strips in rural Minnesota, and a lot of it was for the pheasant population here in western Minnesota. This is how you bring wildlife back to the farm. and not just pheasants. This is how you bring everything back. It's just amazing when you fix the soil health, all that comes back. Our farm, when I was a kid, 40 plus years ago, 50 years ago, we used to house 80 to 90 white-tailed deer here every winter. It was because we still had the diversity in our cropping system. We hadn't tore out all the fences. The wildlife had a place to go, and I never imagined that we would rebuild the wildlife that we see on our farm. And it's gotten to be a problem for us, but it's so great to see it again, to see more life on the land on every acre we have. You know, we've got endangered species out here that they're not endangered to me because I see them all the time during the summer. Massive amounts of birds, populations coming back. So Dr. Jonathan Lundgren is a friend of ours, and it's a huge deal. It's a buzzword in agriculture, along with all the rest of the world, is no bees, no plants, no people. We no longer have to use insecticides on our farm on a seed treatment or with an airplane or with a high boy. And you can see in these pictures, hopefully, the diversity we got back. We've got dragonflies back here like I've never seen before. We got butterflies back like I've never seen before. And we also host a tremendous amount of bees on our farm. Ian Mitchell Ennis was one of the first guys that taught me this from South Africa. He says, if you build it, they will come. And I didn't understand what he was saying. And I guess now we do. It's when we manage our little part of the world right, there's a lot of things that can come back and be of benefit to our farm. So Dawn and I agreed to do this because as producers on the land, and I also sit as the Minnesota State Cattlemen's president, so I talk to a lot of producers, represent a lot of producers. I, as a farmer, firmly believe we need to change the way we farm out here before we're regulated into it. Regulations in agriculture don't work for any of us. They're nothing but they put us into complete and full fight mode when regulations come down. So we host soil health academies on our farm. It's 3 days intense to teach all these principles in the row crop and in the grazing setup, or direct marketing, or any of the other things that we can do and have changed to doing here on the farm. I guess that's
our story.
That's our story. We'll stop with that. I'm sure that provokes some questions for later.
Oh, Dawn and Grant, that was amazing. Hold your questions, folks. We will for sure get to them, but I am going to kick it off to Martin. You're up next.
So I'm going to go into screen sharing too. Use so many platforms now, I have to remember how to use each one. Okay, can we see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'll start the slideshow. So some similarities, a lot of similarities for me to Grant and Dawn. I don't have much for livestock though. So I am a cash grain farmer. And a number of years ago, I was a conventional tillage, no cover crops grain farmer. And if you'd have taken some of these photos that I have now and brought them back to me in 2010, I said, no way, can't make that work. You're gonna go broke. You're not gonna grow enough crop. You're not gonna have enough yield, and expenses are gonna be too high, etc. Whatever, all kinds of excuses. So that's my home farm there. That's my oat crop from last year. This is my family. My dad in the upper left, my uncle, they've since retired. Of course, farmers never, other than in Grant and Dawn's position where they really did retire and leave the farm. Most farmers don't do that. They retire, but then hang around. And that's what my family has done. And that's good. I'm proud to farm with my family. So my dad and uncle and I were farming together, and now they've since retired. and that's my son there. So that's generation 6 with my son. I converted to no-till cover crops. I have small grains, and I do a lot in forestry as well. Have a sawmill, do logging, plant trees also, which I don't include in this presentation. I'm also president of the Minnesota Caving Club. So I go into caves in Minnesota, predominantly Southeast Minnesota. So I started this change in 2013. And why 2013? That was when we had 17 inches of snow in the first week of May. And that was a pretty bizarre weather event for us. And we actually didn't get all of our crops planted. We have crop insurance, and they'll, at a certain date, if you can't get your corn or soybeans planted, they will pay you. It's called prevent plant. So we had these acres with nothing on it, and we took crop insurance on it. And that was my first experience with cover crops. And I didn't know what we were doing. My dad didn't know what he was doing. They were going to plug your tile lines, all kinds of rumors around them. But we did cover everything that year. We didn't leave anything fallow. We had like 350 acres of cover crops. And then the next year I tried some no-till. And then by 2 or 3 years later, I was 100% in and ramping up the cover crops. And since then, this is 2019. These photos were taken at my farm right out up on the hill by my house. And it was storm after storm after storm that came through in 2019. And I had 54 inches of rain at my house during the growing season. So it caused this. Outside of Rochester, there was a video that went viral of flooding and, cattle that this good friend of mine is pasturing, grazing, and, they couldn't get out at 2 a.m. to get the cattle off the pasture. And then this happened. You can see the scarring on the landscape, the damage to infrastructure, and that was all in 2019. It caused, erosion like in this upper left-hand corner here, that would remind me of, prior to the conservation movements of the 1920s and 30s, the Dust Bowl. Because I work for the conservation district, I've had experiences with well pollution, nitrates in groundwater, and it became apparent that these were going to have to become priorities. And it became apparent that maybe farming for a lot of years was going to be like, well, I got one hand in the freezer and I got one hand in the oven, but on average, I'm about right. Well, beyond that, we are warming, we are increasing in moisture. We had December 15th with a historic tornado outbreak. I had damage. That's my yard actually in September 20th in the lower right-hand corner. It's my friend's yard in December 15th. And then the fertilizer plant got brand new fertilizer plant, got the roof taken off on it December 15th. So what did that do to me? A lot of negative news, right? It forced me starting in 2013 to see the farm differently, because I want to hand it off in better shape than it was given to me. I'm this temporary steward of it, and it's been in the family for so long that even now I want to hand it off in better shape than I received it. So I need to be profitable because I have to pay the bills. I want to be sustainable, emphasis on conservation, stewardship, nitrate and carbon sequestration, and soil building. And I knew I had to do that through some diversification. And I want to share my story, and that's why I'm here. That's why I'm telling my story. So back way up to these first experiences, and I didn't even have a grain drill like you see in the photo here, but I would plant winter rye. Rye will germinate in cold temperatures after harvest, and that was my first experiences. So I'd take the soybeans off, soybean combining, typically starts last days of September through the first week or two of October. And you go right out there and get some cover crop seeded. At first, I was just putting it on top. And then in time, I started doing a better job at it and actually focusing on that cover crop. So this photo actually happens to be December 23rd, and I planted up that late and had a successful cover crop to plant green into, like Dawn and Grant are doing, planting all the way up till Christmas if that snow cover isn't there. Like Dawn and Grant, I seed into growing crops. I built a little different tool to do that. So a lot of the tools that are required, or equipment that are required to do this type of seeding, are not available from a dealership. And if they are, they're starting to be now. They're cost prohibitive. They're way out of my price range. So I built this, and I took the parts from equipment that was around the farm that we were no longer using. And the only part that's new, I guess, is this part that carries the seed here, this red box, the candy box. And that delivers the seed through the tubes down in between the rows. And then these finger wheels do a little bit of incorporation or stirring on the surface of the soil to get that soil down, or that seed down to the soil where it can germinate. Unlike a drill, like I can go quite fast with this and cover a lot of acres, which is important to me because usually I'm alone and I do my own spraying and I do my own fertilizer application. So I got a lot going on during this time of the year. So I have to get it done as fast as I possibly can. And this is what it looks like during harvest then. So you can see some red clover and annual ryegrass growing down underneath the corn. And, you know, from a farmer's perspective, there's some things that we have to do to make this work that are not like what we've done. It's not like how we were taught how to farm. We were not taught to put things to grow back in our corn crop. We were supposed to kill all that. So all you had was nice rows of corn with black soil in between. And it's very, you know, so we have part economics. It costs money to build the equipment or to buy it, to buy the seed, to put it down. And if I was to graze this, I mean, it's another added value, but I have a job in town. I can't manage the cattle right now. But it is an additional cost. So where is the payoff, right? So it's part economics, but then there's the psychological aspect to making these changes, because we were so programmed to see black between green corn rows. I spend a lot of time talking with others about that psychology because it's very real. That was not how we were taught how to farm. Growing oats gave me another way to seed a cover crop. And these are food grade oats. They're actually purchased by a company called Oatly. If you go to grocery stores, you'll find it on the shelves. That I actually sell directly to Oatly now. And oats are a short season crop. You seed them very early in the spring, earlier than corn and soybeans. And then you take them off the last weeks or days of July and the first week of August. So this is that field at the time that I've harvested it. And underneath you can see this growing clover, which is my cover crop. And clover is a legume. And that's interesting to me. Now, if I had the livestock, this would be an important feed source. But to me, it's how much carbon is in that when it's as tall as the bumper of the Ranger there, as well as the roots that are below the ground that we don't see in this photo. But then that is also providing nitrogen for the next year's corn crop, because I'll go into corn the next year. And here I am planting green. This is where I usually talk to farmers about some some things that you specifically have to do to get a good crop when you plant into green cover crops like that. But for, you know, a non-farming crowd, I mean, I think that it's interesting to see just what that looks like when you plant into such a thick stubble and cover crop. Here's what that little seed down in the soil there. You can see all the roots around it. This was in spring of 2021, so it was quite dry. You can kind of see that in the soil, but it was a perfect seed bed. And when the planter went through, so the planter is on the left-hand side of the photo here. Here's the wheels that close the furrow that seal the seed in. And you barely even know that any piece of equipment went through that field to seed that corn. And here it is a few days after planting when I've terminated that cover crop. So I chemically terminate the cover crop, and you can see that it's dead now, that it's just residue. So because we were so dry in the spring of 2021, now it becomes moisture protection, that hot heat of the day that starts in June is held off the soil surface and keeps that soil surface cooler, which keeps the soil microbes, the soil biology alive and functioning better. So maybe by about the third week, my neighbors realized that I actually had a cornfield in there. And this is when I'm applying an additional amount of nitrogen fertilizer to that field. And this is probably about a month, probably about five. It would be about 5 or 6 weeks after planting, same field. So it went from oats to clover underneath. The clover was planted into a cornfield. And then after it becomes a cornfield, you can see that I'll seed that cover crop right back into it. So there's that period of time that the corn needs to be the only plants out there growing. And that's what we do. I provide that window of opportunity for the corn to get growing, and I put a cover crop right back into it. A little bit on yields and profitability, and then the studies that we do in order to refine how much fertilizer to apply, because that clover is a legume and it is applying additional nitrogen to the corn crop. So I do check strips every year, and this one, you know, happens to be like a nitrogen rate of 74 pounds to 180 pounds. And then you look at the yields to see if there's statistically different yields with increasing in fertilizer. And in this one, it appears that in 2021, the right nitrogen application amount was 100 pounds, which is about 40 to 50 pounds less than most farmers put on corn on soybeans. So that's a significant change when you're getting, I'm not saying it's free nitrogen, but it's a better nitrogen source than manufacturing that using petroleum products and transporting it to the Midwest. Some of it comes from Kuwait and gets applied to farm fields in the Midwest, where we can plant a clover crop and provide some of that nitrogen and grow 230 bushel corn. A little bit about the oats, how I got into it, why I got into it. A lot of it was to spread economic diversity. You know, we had a trade war that happened that fluctuated prices. We had COVID that happened that fluctuated prices, and now we're coming out of it. And input costs for corn and soybeans are significant right now. Fertilizer, like just for an example, 1 pound of nitrogen went from 45 cents a pound to over $1, depending on when you buy it. So if you buy it now, it's probably about $1.10 a pound. So 45 cents to $1.10, depending on the product that you're buying. So with oats, it takes significantly less fertilizer, significantly less inputs. So it's a diversity on the economic side. It's also a diversity as far as establishing cover crops. It breaks my 2-year rotation because I'm a grain farmer predominantly. and it spreads the workload when I'm working alone because I can get these oats off in the summer. And again, it feels good to be growing food instead of most of my corn. In fact, every kernel of corn that I grow goes through an ethanol plant. So it feels better to me to be, growing food. Here I am out last days of March last year, putting the oats in the ground. Use the same grain drill. There's my son out in the oat field. This would be about May. This would be in May, end of May, last days of May, first days of June. I do spray a little bit of fungicide on them to keep a disease called rust away. That rust will steal the test weight of the oat. So I do go out there and protect the plant a little bit. And then I harvest them. This is at my home place. And I harvest them in the last days of July, first days of August. You can see my log pile up and behind my truck there for the sawmill. I use my combine that I use for corn and soybeans. The head is just the soybean head. I make just some slight adjustments so I can cut those oats off. We strive for clean samples, high test weight, and this is what it looks like when I'm out in the field. This is Rochester in the background. So this is kind of I'm pretty close to Rochester. Little bit on the work that I do for through the Olmsted County Soil and Water Conservation District. I do most of the work there is plant a cover crop, collect the groundwater underneath it, and see what happens. We're getting really good at predicting what nitrate concentrations are below corn and soybeans, and the results that you will have when you increase when you introduce cover crops or small grains. Small grains are up to 90% reduction in nitrates. Cover crops are 30 to 60% depending on growth. So up on the top here, you can see the kind of trials we do on a plot scale. The interseeding that you see next to it, we've trialed with like 60-inch corn, which folks have tried. We usually plant in 30-inch rows. We go wider. Can you get a better cover crop out there? Here's my son standing in them. And right in front of my son there is the pump that we use to pull out the water from underneath. And I know that's small, I apologize, but that's where we pull the water out from underneath the corn or soybeans. And here I am out planting those plots, green. Just an example of the data. And we take, this is one growing year, and we took 225 samples. So we try to get, scientific level studies. I mean, they're statistically sound when we're done. I also study shallow spring sheds, springs, karst springs, shallow wells, and even down in the caves. I've started to collect the cave drips from the ceiling and then work with the farmers above the cave, and we make changes up on the landscape and collect the cave drips down 90 feet underneath the farm field. So it's a very unique a way to collect groundwater from underneath row crops. And we keep telling that story. And hopefully and that's not hopefully, it is being paid attention to, that, so that either funding cycles or hopefully my goal is to someday affect the Farm Bill. I know it's kind of it's a lofty goal, but to be able to change the way our Farm Bill is structured so that we can change the way we farm and that the Farm Bill supports it. Because right now I feel that the Farm Bill is not supporting it well enough. So this is a cave in Fillmore County. It's actually in a road ditch. So that cars actually drive right over this cave. That's about 30, 40 feet from ceiling to floor. And you can see somebody must have lost a tire along the way, because there it is way in the back. So that about wraps me up.
Martin, thank you so much. Hope folks are hanging on to questions. We're going to let Grace speak next to round us out from Homegrown Minneapolis. And then we'll just open it up to all of our speakers who have generously just are able to stick around and answer questions. So with that, take it away, please, Grace.
Thank you. Let me just off this screen share here. And present it. That look good for you? All right, great. Well, thank you for having me. It was great to hear from all these awesome farmers doing some great work on actually getting their hands dirty on kind of the big scale here. My name is Grace, and I work with the Homegrown Minneapolis Initiative, which is based in the city's health department. I've been here for a little over a year so far. So, as Lauren said before, Homegrown Minneapolis is a city community partnership that expands our community's ability to grow, process, distribute, eat, and compost more healthy, sustainable, locally grown foods. It was launched in 2008. Homegrown Minneapolis also operates and is involved with the Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council, which is a 25-member city advisory group comprised of 17 community and 8 city representatives, which was launched in 2012. So that's kind of our community arm, part of the boards and commissions process at the city government. So I'll just start by giving kind of a quick snapshot of what the food system looks like in Minneapolis. This is a lot of just a tiny bit of the bigger food system. But in 2021, there were 166 licensed food trucks, 1 mobile grocery store, 5 shared kitchens, commercial kitchens, 350 backyard chicken coops, 5 food retail co-ops, 19 farmers markets, and over 60 gardens in the garden lease program. So I mentioned growing healthy local food. This is one of our big focuses. We support efforts to grow this healthy local food in Minneapolis. One example is through the garden lease program. In partnership with the Community Planning and Economic Development Department, which is CPED for short, if you ever hear CPED around, Homegrown Minneapolis leases over 60 city-owned vacant lots for community and market gardens, so no longer vacant. There's a little map up on the screen. All of the orange dots are the leased lots, and the green lots are ones that are available to be leased in the program. Each lot in the program has been soil tested, which is a pretty cool thing that our partners in environmental health are able to do. And that helps kind of determine the necessity of raised beds and make sure everybody is safe. Another program we are doing is the greenhouse pilot program. Homegrown Minneapolis has partnered with the University of Minnesota Center for Sustainable Building Research, Tamales Bicicletas in South Minneapolis, and Appetite for Change in North Minneapolis to design, construct, and operate passive solar year-round greenhouse structures. So food can be grown year-round in these greenhouses, but especially during the coldest months of the year, which is really hard, as we all know, in Minnesota. As you can see in this little picture here, they look pretty snazzy and can have a pretty big growing space, which is great. Both of those organizations are BIPOC-led organizations that work in areas of environmental and food justice in chronically underrepresented and disenfranchised populations in Minneapolis. So they are doing some great work, and we're excited to have this going. It's expanding hyper-local food production capabilities, so growing it right in your backyard. It's providing training opportunities for youth and is going to provide more access to fresh produce year-round that's grown right here. It is almost done. They are, we've had a lot of delays with COVID and construction prices went up and all these different things, but we're super excited to have them getting to be growing, and we'll for sure share more once they're open for kind of their grand opening, but it's a great project. It also is a pilot project as well for zoning regulation purposes, because currently greenhouses fall under a different sort of zoning administration that does not allow them to be up all winter long. unless you get special permitting. So this is our exciting kind of kickstart to try to show that the value in growing food all year round in Minneapolis. Another way we support growing food as well as composting is through the Community Garden Compost Program. This is a program that offers compost community gardens in Minneapolis. We partner with the Division of Solid Waste and Recycling on this. In the spring, there's 400 cubic yards and 30 deliveries available for free. And in the fall, 200 yards and 15 deliveries. There's also low cost options for if all of those free deliveries and yards are used up. We offer even more available at like a super low rate. Last year in 2021, 501 cubic yards were distributed for free to 59 different community gardens. So that is great. Supplying, you know, compost can be really expensive for people living in Minneapolis if you're, you know, not producing on a large scale. So we're excited to be able to provide that option for folks. And I mentioned compost, I mentioned the soil testing on these garden lease lots, but what does that, you know, have to do with soil health? Like, why am I talking about this? And I'm going to thank, first of all, Jim, my lovely colleague in environmental health, for sharing some of this information with me. One of the biggest hazards when we're thinking about growing in the city is lead. It's ubiquitous on our boulevards due to the 60s and 70s use of leaded gas, as well as in a lot of yards, like if you're next to your house or your foundation with old lead paint chips, that can have, you know, an increase in lead in your soil there. However, there's been a lot of research done, and I guess good news that leafy vegetables don't appear to absorb much lead from the soil, and root vegetables are maybe just like a tiny bit. So the bigger concern, if you're thinking about growing and concerned about lead and the health of your soil, you know, being in an urban area, is working the soil. You want to make sure you're washing your hands, washing your vegetables, wearing gloves, and just being super safe about that. So considering that, what can we do to improve our soil health here? One of the biggest things is you can get your soil tested so you know what you're working with. One option is the University of Minnesota Soil Testing Laboratory. They have, depending on the time of year, a pretty big turnaround period. I think right now it's about 2 weeks. There's also commercial laboratory options, and these you can just send in samples for analysis from your own yard, and they'll send back to you sort of a report of all the different minerals and nutrients and hazards that are in your soil. There is also ongoing research being done about soil health, including a project where the city is partnering with the University of Minnesota in the Ventura neighborhood regarding impacts of compost on lead risks in soil and how compost can alter that. The other thing you can do is that if you're really concerned about lead or other hazards in your soil, you can always build a raised bed. Those are a good option. Obviously a little bit more labor, but kind of the safest choice. And then finally, compost and biochar can help reduce soil hazards because they increase soil health. We are starting a biochar production program in Minneapolis as part of our climate action. When mixed with compost, it can help water retention, nutrient retention, plant growth, and overall soil health. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. You heard a lot about how regenerative agriculture can look on these farms, and I'll add a little bit about biochar as well. The city passed the Regenerative Agriculture and Biochar Resolution in June of 2019. This recognizes their use as important resilience tools for climate action that help residents and the environment. This resolution directed staff to explore how to support and implement regenerative agriculture and biochar practices in future projects, building on multiple biochar projects that have been executed in the city since 2014. So it's been going on for a while. And you've heard from Grant and Martin about regenerative agriculture, but what can this look like in Minneapolis? What is this resolution talking about? Why do we care? Regenerative agriculture strategies to cultivate healthy soil and can sink and store carbon in urban settings include incorporating compost into gardens and landscapes, planting deep-rooted native and perennial species, eliminating pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, reducing or eliminating tillage, and reducing food waste through on-site composting, as well as through municipal organics recycling. These practices all support the production of nutritious, locally grown food and can provide economic opportunities as well relating to urban farming, landscaping, compost, and biochar production, especially for people in communities facing disproportionate negative impacts for climate change. And this regenerative agriculture in our cities, as I said, is really important for these communities. You can see this great garden picture from the Peace Garden on 18th and Emerson Avenue in North Minneapolis. Just one of the great examples of places that are practicing regenerative agriculture and seeing how they can, shape our communities in a lot of positive ways. So I mentioned this word biochar. I also did not really know a lot about what this meant before. But it's a really exciting thing that's over like 2,000 years old of a practice. Obviously, it looks different, a little different now, but biochar is a carbon-rich charcoal that's made from agricultural waste heated to really high temperatures. This charcoal helps soils retain nutrients and water. So when added to soil, it can really improve soil health, increase soil biodiversity, and through that boost food security. Biochar also acts as a long-term carbon sink and can sequester carbon in the soil for multiple centuries, which is really exciting. Therefore, this is carbon negative technology that can help Minneapolis reach our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. So that is one of the reasons that we are looking into biochar. As I mentioned from these benefits, biochar can be used in urban agriculture, as well as things like soil remediation, stormwater management, urban forestry, and just plain old carbon sequestration for the point of sequestering carbon. In the bottom photo here, you can see the soil on the left has been treated with biochar, while the soil on the right has not. So you can see it's much more rich on the left and is also more dried out on the right. Similarly, in the photo on the right, you can see that the larger corn is on the right, and that was grown in biochar. Same situation, just like 2 test plots. So it has this like crazy impact on crop yield. It's kind of like unbelievable in terms of the benefits that it can provide. So we've been using biochar in multiple different ways and have some exciting projects going on. We have worked with numerous community organizations and neighborhood associations to reduce food insecurity and build climate resilience through the utilization of biochar. Through these projects, we've demonstrated that biochar can increase drought resistance and crop yields, as well as support stormwater management, pollinators, and urban forestry. The Little Earth housing community did some things, as well as Ventura Village, Pillsbury United, and the 24th Street Urban Farming Coalition are just like some brief ideas of who we've been working with. And then, as I said, the urban forestry, pollinator habitat, and stormwater kind of pilot projects have been going along Hiawatha Avenue and its boulevards. There's a lot of great pictures that I didn't have room for of all these cool projects, but it's exciting. And the next big thing here is the planning development of a regional biochar production facility right in Minneapolis. We're working in a partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies, the University of Minnesota, the Natural Research Institute, and the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance to develop ways that Minneapolis can achieve climate goals through using biochar for carbon sequestration. The most recent news on that is that January 31st, the City Council approved a grant application that has matching health department funds for production of this facility. So they're getting moving on that project, which is exciting. So what does regenerative agriculture and biochar do here? As a city and community, this resolution serves as a pretext for policies and programs that, for a number of things, meet goals outlined in the Climate Action Plan, which doesn't yet include agriculture. We are developing a Minneapolis Food Action Plan to help identify specific goals and benchmarks to address climate change and healthier local food system. The resolution also encourages residents to support a healthy, local, and just food economy by purchasing directly from farmers practicing regenerative agriculture. It empowers residents, organizations, and businesses to lower their carbon footprint while implementing regenerative agriculture practices in their own backyards, community gardens, and market gardens. And then finally, this resolution helps promote regenerative agriculture practices on city-owned lots leased through the Garden Lease Program, as well as on other public land. So this resolution seems like just like a little word that like might not actually have an impact, but resolutions are really important for providing this justification and pretext for future policies and programs, and that staff can implement. So regenerative agriculture, soil health, biochar, and everything else that's talked about tonight play a really important part in Homegrown Minneapolis's commitment to our community's ability to grow, process, distribute, eat, and compost more healthy local foods. We are, as I mentioned, developing the Minneapolis Food Action Plan to put together all of these pieces and more guide the future of the city's local food system. The goal of the Minneapolis Food Action Plan is to develop a 2030 roadmap for a more equitable, climate resilient, just, and sustainable local food system and economy. This will guide Minneapolis food systems action, building on previous efforts and plans, and aligns with the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, as well as incorporates data and a lot of community input. The Food Action Plan will serve as an appendix to the city's climate action plan, and also as its own standalone framework with food systems data and recommended goals, strategies, tactics, and measurable indicators for City of Minneapolis policy, investment, and food council action. So how can you help with the Food Action Plan if you're interested? We need your help to impact the local food system. We have a survey. If you live or work in Minneapolis, you can provide feedback on the Minneapolis Food Action Plan and also enter to win a $50 grocery card, just a little chance. All responses are confidential. Most questions are optional. It's not that long of a survey. And we are in this final stage of hearing from Minneapolis residents. After we get this feedback, we're going to start drafting the Food Action Plan and start working on that, talking it over with the Food Council and get this roadmap moving. So it's really exciting. I will pause here on the, you can take the survey at this link, which is z.umn.edu/MPLS Food Action Plan Survey. Or there's also a little QR code that you can scan if that works better for you. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your priorities, what's missing, like, are we missing something crazy in our food action plan? We like really want to hear it. Yeah, I'll leave that up for a little more here. And thanks. If you are looking for more information, you can go to minneapolismn.gov/homegrown or email homegrown@minneapolismn.gov. Thanks.
Grace, thank you so much. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, we are honored that each of our guests has just been so generous with their sharing their expertise and their experience around soil health and regenerative agriculture. And now we're going to open it up for questions. I know I initially said let's do it in the chat, but I think let's not. We're a small enough group tonight. And I think, you know, for the sake of recording and not listening to me share every question, let's go for it and just speak up to ask questions. And if you're more comfortable in the chat or you have kiddos around in the background, you are very welcome to use that too, but no need to do that if you don't mind just sharing your question out loud. And I do have some that our green team is pre-drafted, so give it just a sec longer. And if not, we're going to dive into that list because it's
this is Kelly. I have a first one for Grant and Dawn. Have you guys calculated like the difference between your annual operational costs, like pre all of the changes you've made versus now that you've done them? I'm just curious if there is also a financial savings in addition to environmental benefits.
I can talk about this for hours.
But we won't.
So just the basics from my banker that we still borrow money to put a crop in. On the size of our operation, should have taken between $800,000 and $850,000 to buy the inputs to put the crop in this year. We're going to do it on less than $350,000 worth of inputs.
That's amazing.
our herbicide usage has dropped to about 40% of what we used to. We no longer use insecticides. It's made farming profitable for us, and it's made farming fun again for us.
And Martin, do you have any cost differences or track any of that?
Yeah, I'd say that, you know, like if you were to do a percentage, like what just Grant and Dawn said, I mean, I'm maybe not quite down that low, but I'm really close to it. That, you know, if you look at like tillage, for example, for this year, all things off to the side, and just look at tillage. If your tractor's burning, you know, a gallon an acre, that's $5 a gallon just in diesel fuel for tillage. You know, maybe somebody's doing it a little less, but then you have the cost of the tractor, the depreciation, the cost of the tillage tool. So let's just say in general, a tillage pass is $15 to $20 per acre. So just keep it simple like that. But then there is also the added reductions in going to like oats, which this year it costs about $495 an acre to put in an acre of oats. And it costs about $950 an acre to put in an acre of corn. And in the end, if you raised 100 bushel oats, which would be relative to 200 bushel corn, I can grow the same. It's about the same. If you could grow 200 bushel corn, you're going to grow 100 bushel oats. You will bring home at the end of the day $150 of profit off of that acre of oats, as compared to corn. Let's just say 200 bushel at $6. You're bringing home a little bit more potentially, but with a substantially higher amount of investment, which has interest. But I can also use that money to do something else with it and make money with it. So that it's the return on the dollar is substantially higher in this system compared to a conventional system. And I could talk about the added benefits to the corn and soybean rotation, because you're breaking the rotation, so you're growing more corn and soybeans. That's all due to breaking up your rotation. So economics are very real, and I could argue it all day long like Grant and Dawn can. Yeah.
Can I do 2 quick follow-up questions, Lauren? Okay, so first of which, so I think you both mentioned needing to get crop insurance in the past. Is that something that you've had to do since? Or not like pay for insurance, but get the money from the government for the, you know, a failure of X, Y, or Z?
I had, so 2019 was a substantial year in government subsidies for our portion of the state. Because there was so much rain, I did collect on crop insurance. I mean, there is no system that could probably, unless you were 100% grazing, which Grant and Dawn probably could handle that kind of rainfall better than I did. Because that my cropping system can't handle 54 inches of rain. And then there was WHIP assistance and CFAP assistance, and what was the last one was market facilitation program payments. So just to be completely transparent, you know, the federal government paid me $140,000 of direct payments because of 2019 crop year. And you know how much of that subsidy went to my oat crop? $0. That was all on corn and soybeans. So when I talk about the frustration of the farm bill, that is my frustration, is that all went to corn and soybeans. The subsidies for the disruption in markets due to the trade disputes and coronavirus paid very little on the other commodities. But as a whole, the crop insurance program will recognize that you plant cover crops, and that is reducing risk. So they're giving you $5 off the premium if you plant cover crops. That's new of the last 2 years. So I guess that's my spiel with crop insurance. I don't know, Grant and Dawn can add to that.
Well, it's as soon as we're debt free, that's the first thing I'm going to give up. I don't believe in the program, but being as we borrow so much money to put a crop in, our lender actually writes it in our contract for our line of credit that we have to carry a certain amount of coverage. So we do still carry it.
Have you had to claim it since you've changed your practices at all, or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. This last year
So-
we were D3 drought here in western Minnesota for
Right.
two months. I would say we fared way better than our neighbors. Our claims were way less than our neighbors. I mean, we had neighbors here that had absolutely zero crop. We were still about 40 to, some of our crops were actually 90% of what we normally produce.
All right. And then my one follow-up question, which is a thing that's happening a lot right now with regenerative agriculture, and maybe not something people like really thought of before they change practices. And Grace, maybe this is something for some of the pilots happening in Minneapolis, but has there been any testing of like the nutrient values of the crops you're producing pre and post?
Oh, yes, it's unbelievable. Look up Dr. David Montgomery, and I'm sorry, I can't think of his wife's name. They just spent the last 2 years researching this on farms all across the United States of America. And we're running about 25 to as high as 45% higher nutrient density, no matter what you're measuring, whether it's crops and grains we're growing, or beef or poultry or pork or vegetables. It's unbelievable, the nutrient density over and above what we were doing when we were in what I would call conventional agriculture. And that's the one thing that Dawn and I have really benefited on our farming operation is we raise cattle, hogs, poultry. Our death losses are way less. Our antibiotic use is virtually zero. The only time we use an antibiotic is to treat an injured animal. And like I said, it's just made farming fun again. We're mimicking, or we're actually getting back to doing what nature had kind of planned all along, maybe.
Very happy to hear that.
I popped I'm going to toss it to Ginny for the next question, but I did pop a quick link to David Montgomery speaking on a podcast. So if you are interested in hearing a little bit more about his work, Grant, I'm so grateful you mentioned that, which is a great next step for everybody after tonight. And Ginny, you are up on deck next for questions.
Okay, I'm sorry, I actually didn't get to hear the talks, but I wanted to come online and just really thank the speakers tonight, Grace, Martin, who I haven't heard speak before, but I've heard Grant and Dawn speak before about 2 years ago, and I think they're getting as famous as Gabe Brown. I think you guys are great. I remember Dawn saying, and maybe she said this, that she never wanted to marry a farmer, and here she is. And that one day she woke up, I mean, and being married to a farmer was good, but one day she woke up and said, I don't want to wake up anymore and think about what I'm going to kill today. I don't know if she said that today, but I just thought your journey is just so relatable as a personal story that I think us urbanites really don't get to hear that. And I didn't get to hear what you shared tonight, but I just really want to really thank you for taking time to do this. And my question would be, we hear a lot about the urban rural divide and all this sort of stuff, but I've heard that soil health is like neutral. That it seems like both sides seem to really like soil health. But my question is, what advice would you give us urbanites on how best to support what your goals are? And, you know, to know that we want what regenerative agriculture brings, like from the nutrition and the food, the pollinators, all this, the rain, the small water cycles, that how can we best support you to move this forward? Is it learning what legislation we have to support? Is it, I mean, any advice? And thank you, Lauren. I mean, I think this is, you know, to have this as a neighborhood forum is like just so cool.
I guess it for me and Dawn, it comes down to education. We're still learning every day, but we've made it a priority for us is to educate as many people as we can. And like Dawn always says, it's one person at a time that we get converted. You know, we may go speak to a group of 300 farmers, but one of them will convert. As far as the legislation side, and I covered this just a touch, and what we did discuss is that's part of it, is we need to educate other farmers that there is a different way to farm before we're legislated to do it. You can put the same legislation on us and Martin, and our farms are never going to look the same. We're human beings. We're never going to interpret those rules and regulations the same way. And I'll say this, I mean, farmers are, as soon as regulations come through, they just go into full fight mode. You know, why is the government telling us to do this? And they'll do everything they can to fight it. So I firmly believe it's about getting the education out there that there is a different way to farm. We've had, 50 to 75 years high input agriculture. Farmers, as a rule, 85 to 90% of their input decisions that they make on their farm, they do by what their input suppliers tell them to do. Why are we listening to the people that are taking the money out of our pocket? I'll stop with that.
I think it comes down to like what you purchase too. I mean, if there's, the farm to table connection, I think needs to be bolstered. Whether it's, the meat or the protein side of it, it's from beef to pork to chicken. But as cash grain farmer, you can't go to the, right now we're getting, predominantly we all drive gasoline cars, right? So you go to the pump at Quick Trip or wherever, you name it, you can't choose to buy the gas or the ethanol that's in the blend from a farmer who's putting in the cover crops and everything. You can't choose that. And I think if that choice was there, I think that there would be an added value to what we're doing. Because is a soil health produced bushel of corn worth more than a soil health than a conventional bushel of corn? And to society, yes, it is in a lot of ways. But in reality, I don't get paid any different on that bushel of corn than anybody else. And on the cash grain side of things, which affects the vast majority of acres in Minnesota, we have to draw that connection better. And there's a lot of ideas that have been thrown around, but they're not really gaining traction yet. On the food side of things, it's easy. Like, okay, I said that my oats, a third of my production acres now, of the 700 production acres, are in oats that go directly to Oatly. So if you buy Oatly products, you're probably buying, to some degree, there might be an oat growing on Martin Larsen's farm now. Because it is a direct supply chain, because they pick them up. And I've never been able to say that before. It's like, well, if you buy ethanol, who knows where it came from? Well, now we can say that with but that also took the initiative of the company, which has their own agenda of, greenwashing maybe is the bad word, But yes, it's a combination of private, but also, you know, it could be farm bill structure, but it also could be community structure. And then your choice matters in what you buy. That you have the choice. You're getting the choice to buy better than what we had 10 years ago.
Grace, I want to give you a chance to jump in if you have anything to add. And just in terms of what we can do, such a great question, Ginny.
Yeah, in terms of, I think, yeah, the different levels of policy are definitely kind of, I think, one of the challenges for like individual action. But one thing I'll plug aside from, you know, being involved in our local government and supporting production plan stuff is there's also the Mini Ag Coalition, which is a legislative advocacy kind of group of different organizations working to you know, share resources and promote different things like regenerative agriculture. I can drop the website. We've been listening in on that at Homegrown. So that's one place to kind of pay attention to what's happening in legislature. And really just like share those you know, thoughts and your opinions about it. A lot of times those letters of support on topics like this can make a really big impact on legislatures, especially at the state level. Obviously, you know, federal level is a whole nother ballgame. But that is one of the big things you can do, and just get involved in your local community again is really great opportunity for that.
Thank you. Rose, you are up next to ask a question.
Hi, thank you. I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for all of your work and the efforts that you have done with all of the work that you do. It's just fascinating hearing everything that you all have done, and the gosh, just the stuff that your resiliency. And so my question is, I'm a disaster specialist, and but I also do some community planning, not only with my family, but with my tribe. And so, and the communities around me. And so I wanted to find out, how are you guys doing with the disasters? I mean, do you guys just have to work on resiliency, like resiliency planning for your crops? Or do you have to do, I mean, I know that obviously we can't really depend on the federal government for, you know, helping us out during disasters. So I'm just curious as to how you all deal with that.
I think on the disaster side of it, I just, my eyes have really been open since 2019 as far as what flooding can do. And you know, and then September 20th, I had that tornado in my yard, and insurance was like $40-some thousand of damage to my yard. I lost 2 sheds, trees went on the house, and then looking what the December 15th storm did, you know, I've in helping my neighbors and stuff, and clean up buildings, etc. I built, because I have the sawmill and stuff, like I built one of the sheds that I lost, and I built it for snow loads, because in winter of 2019, a friend of mine, the governor actually visited the farm, lost their dairy freestall barn because of snow load. So, well, that thing's not going to collapse. I'm going to build it for snow load. And then the thing blew away. So you talk about like resilience, like I started to say now, you know, like we're going to have to build for floods, for snow load, for wind. You know, like derecho, like I looked that term up. It's like, well, with derecho, now we're hearing it all the time, because they classified December 15th as a derecho. And I tell you, I was with my son on that night at 11:30, and there was 90-mile-an-hour winds in Rochester. Not tornado. There was 90-mile-an-hour wind gusts, and we were in the house, and it's my great grandparents' home, built this home that my son and I live in, and it was shaking, and it's gonna go away. I don't know. I think that resilience for farmers is going to mean buildings. It's going to mean, like, if we get these like derecho style winds in the summer and we lose crops, I think that that is a very real conversation that we need to be having. So
I'll take it a little bit differently. We lost everything in 2011 to what would be called the derecho now. The only thing we had left was our houses. But because we were farming differently, our corn crop actually was still standing. And we did harvest some corn. Our neighbors harvested nothing. Right now, this year with the drought, our corn stood way better than our neighbors. It fell down, they had problems. But I think if we look at it on a way larger scope, is we've been blessed to work with Dr. Alan Williams for a lot of years. And I was visiting with him early one morning after Hurricane Harvey had hit down in Texas. Alan's a genius. He sat in his hotel room and that night and did the math. And if the farmers and ranchers in that area of Texas would have only increased their organic matter 2%, there would have been no flooding from that. I mean, 2019, trying to get down I-29 to get south, can't do it. It's a water infiltration problem that we have on the farmland. I mean, we've done a massive amount of testing here on our farm. We're at 8 to 12, some places as high as 30 inches of rainfall infiltration per hour where that drop of rain hits the soil, not running down the hill and running in through a tile line. That's going into our soil if it has the capacity to hold it, if it's not full. You know, and I can step right across the fence and the neighbors are at less than 1 inch of rainfall infiltration per hour. These weather events are way bigger than they ever used to be. We never get a nice 1 inch rain. It's always a 3 or 5 inch or nothing at all. And we just don't have the runoff on our farm anymore.
We catch the neighbors runoff, unfortunately, and that's hurt us because we are on the bottom of that watershed. So we're catching their rain, and the things that we had healed up over the years have been torn open because of what we're getting from the neighbors. So if they would just start, you know, adopting the practices of soil health, the principles of soil health, we would not be so vulnerable to their runoff.
I'm seeing that Martin has added an amazing link in the chat. Martin, want to share that?
yeah, so this was just like hitting on exactly what Grant and Dawn just said with the runoff and the infiltration. And this was just a storm that happened in June. I think it was 2018. I can't even remember. And it wasn't that big of a storm, but just comparing a conventional tilled field at the exact same time I drove up and down the road, you know, and you can see the timestamps on there. And again, like, what's it worth to everyone? So if you look at a watershed, like if Grant and Dawn live in the Minnesota River watershed, it's quite large. I live in the Zumbro watershed, which is, you know, smaller, but also quite large. If 50% adopted practices and what that would infiltrate, what would that do to flooding? You know, the city of Rochester, when I was quite young in 1991, had to invest millions of dollars into a flood control project. And we're not done with that investment into flood control projects. And this is similar to nitrates too in groundwater. So we can treat the problem with better farming practices and infiltrate the water where it falls and reduce flooding and reduce the expenses that municipalities and other people have to real money. They're really going to have to invest that. So you're either treating it before or after, and that's nitrates too. You know, nitrates in some parts of Olmsted County are moving downward 7 feet per year, depending on the geologic features in that specific area. Eventually, it will be a problem and widespread throughout Olmsted County. That's what's happening in South Metro in Dakota County, that the city of Hastings is going to have to upgrade their nitrate removal system. And I did the math, it was quick. And it would pay for cover crops for 3 years on every single corn acre for just that one investment. And that's not including the maintenance, operation and maintenance. So that's we look at cost as a society, and there's taxes, and everybody cringes when we hear taxes. But then there's like, well, after the fact, if I have to buy a nitrate mitigation system, that's a cost also. So that's just on one, we're talking flooding, we're talking nitrates. We're not talking carbon yet or anything else. So
I'm looking at the time and I see a few questions. One from Kelly in the chat. Ginny's got her hand up, and then Tara. Speakers, are you okay hanging on for just a couple more minutes? Oh, thank you so much. These are great questions. Ginny, let's go to you next, and then Kelly will loop back and grab yours from the chat.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. I just want to, I guess, end from my perspective on something that I find very hopeful, that I've been sort of a healthy soil nerd for the last 4 years, and more excited about healthy soil than ever. But I've recently learned about what I think is a new literacy that seems to be being supported more scientifically. And I get the carbon sequestration, and this is approaching it from the climate standpoint of global warming. But I've known about what we call transpiration, that plants perspire like we do to some extent to keep cool, and it's called transpiration. And it's water vapor going up into the air and changing, so that it can be air instead of water vapor. And that takes energy. And there's a agriculturalist that is a scientist in Australia that has actually converted part of a desert into a rainforest through working healthy soil principles. And he's calculated that if the vegetation on the earth in total increased 4 to 6% because of the cooling that happens when transpiration happens, it actually takes energy. And if you stand around plants, you're going to be cooler. And some people think it's just because of the shade, but it's actually because of the transpiration that's going on. And he said if we could increase total vegetation by 4 to 6%, that we would actually cool the atmosphere enough to reduce the heat, the temperature increase that has happened in global warming. And there's a woman by the name of Dee Purshouse that she's been on this healthy soil. She talks about it as the soil sponge, that she has a friend that's a biophysicist that she asked him to actually look at his literature. And what he said is, yes, it's absolutely solid, and that we probably can't worldwide increase vegetation because, there's mountain tops that we can't really increase, who's going to go put vegetation. But he said, just if you took the agricultural land in the world and increased vegetation by 25%, that would accomplish the same thing. And so I'm just saying that if we really think about that we can increase vegetation in our yards, in our parks, and that if we could all just work on this, it's like, why not? And the side effects are only positive. I mean, if it doesn't even work. And so it's just another tool in the toolbox as far as how we look at helping perennial crops, cover crops, healthy soil. You need the soil sponge to keep the moisture in order for the plants to transpire. So I just wanted to share that I think there's so much exciting, and I do think farmers are going to be the ecological climate heroes of the next decade. And that we could do that really quickly, I think, as far as if we all understood that just 4 to 6% increasing vegetation to cool the atmosphere. I mean, we'd still have to work on alternative energy, but all that infrastructure we're building that, to vegetate the world by 4 to 6% could offset the heat. I mean, it's like, so keep looking at that as far as, I mean, just don't take my word for it. There, like we have to be scientific about what we say, but regenerative farming and regenerative land management, I do think it's such a holistic thing and it helps so much. So anyway, so again, thanks for your education of us. And really, you guys kept me going. I mean, when I heard you guys talk, I just thought, oh, this is never good. But then you really gave me inspiration that it's happening.
So if you want to see something absolutely amazing, go check out our friend Alejandro Carril from Mexico. Chihuahuan Desert, sagebrush, sand. Alejandro is creating his own weather environment on his ranch, and it's only 30,000 acres.
Yeah, it's
And
the small, yes,
and
the
it's
small
only,
water cycle.
yeah, it's only been 8 to 9 years, and he's changed the water cycle in the Chihuahuan Desert. He is now growing grass shoulder high.
I mean, that's so incredible. It's like we have to keep spreading the word, but okay, next question.
I was gonna say, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Grant, and I popped info in the chat. Kelly, do you want to ask your question about carbon credits, or should I read it?
You can read it. I don't have I'm not there in the chat.
Okay, no worries. We have gone away, but I've got it up. Kelly's wondering, Grant, Don, and Martin, have any of you had your carbon credits evaluated and are considered selling them to local companies to meet their sustainability goals? Great question.
We have not done specific testing on carbon other than we measured in our soil every year. We are not going to enter into any of these carbon programs as Dawn and Grant. There's no way we're going to do it because they're not paying us a fair market value for what we're doing on our land. The last time I checked, the only carbon market that's actually trading is in California, and it's at 20 or 26 bucks a ton. And then the people that are handing out these programs to us as farmers are taking 40 to 60% of that money and keeping it for themselves. Once again, the input people are taking money out of farmers' pockets. I will sit and wait or take no carbon payment and know that I'm still building carbon on my land every year, barring Mother Nature not letting it happen.
I do only expect those payments will go up in the future, and I'm hopeful they do for all farmers.
I really hope somebody else steps into the market and gives the farmer the fair market value instead of using it as a greenwashing tool.
Totally agree.
Same. I'm in the same. I feel it's exactly the same way.
Awesome. Tara, you are up next.
Well, actually, so that's a little bit of what I wanted to get into. But it's kind of a two-part question. First was, you mentioned a little bit about the farm culture being a little bit of the barrier to just, trying new things, growing up, being taught to see that black between the rows. And so having to sort of, go against your intuition, your farm intuition in some cases, but are there any other things that you have seen as you obviously have leadership positions statewide within your areas, and going around and talking to farmers? Are there other barriers to farmers because it's the stark contrast between you and your neighbors who haven't changed their practices is amazing. And I would think that in itself would be a selling point. So what is keeping them from changing their practices? And secondly, I posted in the chat just one example of, so this is not a group that's, this is about carbon mapping, which is obviously a step towards, monetizing the value of carbon. And I agree with you that the way that it's getting off to a start is problematic, but so was wind for farmers. So we need to, of course, there's going to be groups that are trying to get in there and make money on it. But these are exactly the kinds of issues that I think that as was brought up, the term urbanites was brought up earlier. These are things that are important to educate us on, so that we can be advocates for you to help make it worth your while. And for those who maybe don't have the passion to do it, but could see that it's a practical way for them to continue to farm into the future, that maybe these are ways that, you know, if they could start monetizing their carbon, that could even just be a way to keep them in farming, no matter if they don't really care about climate change or the environment.
Wow, you got a bunch there to talk to, but so the reason I refuse to go into the carbon market, even if they were paying us more, the market is not of value to me, because we are building carbon in our soil. So each 1% of carbon, organic matter we build in our soil, is 20 to 40 pounds of usable nitrogen for me every year I grow a corn crop. And Martin already said that's costing us $1 a pound. So I'm already getting a $25 to $40 benefit all on my own. And I guess to your other comments about why aren't farmers doing this and why aren't they going to change, is because you cannot imagine the amount of peer pressure in agriculture. There is a reason we are #1 in suicide rates. It's not because we don't all make it financially, it's peer pressure. It's unbelievable what's happened to us over this. I mean, we've grown some awful thick skin, but it's proven worldwide that farmers will fail doing what they know how to do before they will make a change and save themselves. It's just the.
Okay, but and some of you may have heard our story, but I mean, we were at the edge of the cliff. We were pushed into this. It was either we were going to quit or we had to find a different way to farm. And one of the reasons why was because I didn't grow up on a farm. I didn't have all the preconceived generational education that Grant had. And so I was the reason why I kept pushing on him. It's like, this doesn't make sense. Why do we have to go out there and till this field and spray all this stuff? And, you know, why? And he has had a grandfather who was very curious too. And so Grant did a lot of research and reading and stuff like that. And we had to travel a long ways to do research to figure out how to farm differently. The peer pressure has been incredible. But you cannot force people into farming this way. You can't. It's not going to work, because they will find any way to make it fail possible. So it's just, when the teacher or when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And that's why we believe so much in education.
Just the peer pressure alone. So there was a little 22-minute film put out by Dr. Zach Bush and Farmer's Footprint. And it basically featured Dawn and I. There was only 2 families left in our church that would talk to us. This is a rural ag church. That's the peer pressure that's in agriculture. You know, do they talk? Do the rest of those church members talk to us now? Yeah, but it took time. It took time because they felt that what we said, even though we weren't bashing them, we were still bashing agriculture as it stands right now, and that we were too far out front, or we're just a freak of nature, or whatever they wanted to call us, but it was there.
So when they said, Grant and Dawn said, like, we were on the edge, right? So what happened to me is I went through a divorce, and if you pull, there's been actually work done on this where people who have gone no-till or cover cropping has faced some sort of life challenges. And I mentioned psychology before, and they've mentioned the peer pressure, and they did a better job mentioning about, you know, who is our point of contact for information about how to farm. It's It's the agronomists. Who do the agronomists work for? The people selling us the seed, the fertilizer. Who do we trust for equipment decisions? The implement dealer. What are they selling us? Tillage equipment, big tractors. And that whole system is set up to feed us kind of how to farm, right? Including the farm bill. Because, you know, stepping outside of corn and soybeans, you're not covered. I didn't have crop insurance on oats for 3 years because of the way, and that's complicated, but they just don't give you very good insurance until you establish a yield. And I'm not going to beyond the scope of this conversation, but everything is set up, in my opinion, against the change. So like, as far as like, well, why do people change, right? So why do people change their lifestyle? Well, people don't like to change in general because it's, if they're comfortable, they're not going to change. And farmers, like, I'm 40. I've farmed for 12 years. I've been financially involved for 12 years. I've farmed my whole life, but financially involved for 12 years. So if I farm until I'm an average retirement age, but let's just say 70, I don't have that many seasons to screw up, right? So that's kind of like working against me. Like, how many swings does a baseball player get in a career? Thousands, right? He can screw up a lot of swings and still be really good. But a farmer doesn't always get second chances because of tight finances, paying the bills, relying on Mother Nature. There's a lot against the change, right? So yeah, we are like seen as like, you know, what's he growing out in that field? Or there's no way he's making that work. There's no way they're paying the bills on that. That gets said at the coffee shop, because you know what the bragging point is at the coffee shop? I got 260 bushel corn or 240. It's not, well, I grew 220 bushel corn, but my expenses were X number of dollars less. So therefore I brought home, like, it should be like you go up there and say, yeah, you know what my 1040 income tax, my Schedule F said this year? My Schedule F, you know, I had to pay on this or whatever, right? But people won't share that. So the changing is very difficult, but education is key there. They're spot on. So
Wow. Thank you so much. Our speakers have done an amazing job of really unpacking the complexities of so many things that I had not considered going into this workshop. I'm so grateful. Grace, thank you so much for including the food action plan survey that is in the chat. So I encourage everybody to go take that tonight. And just again, thank you so much to each of our speakers, Grant, Dawn, Martin, Grace. We are so grateful for your time and for each of you sharing your expertise. Hopefully, knock on wood, we'll share a recording of this workshop on our website at armatage.org. And then I also just want to add one really quick little note that the ANA got word today that we were awarded a State Board of Soil and Water Resources grant to create an Armatage pollinator garden corridor in the neighborhood. And this is including at rental properties. And now I'm really down for not just adding compost, but also thinking about biochar as an amendment when we're installing those gardens. So stay tuned, there will be more good work to come. And we are so grateful to our speakers and to everybody attending for everything you've put into this great workshop tonight. I'm going to stop the recording and then leave the meeting open for about 5 minutes. Anybody just wants to say thanks again, but I'm also aware it's been almost 2 hours, and speakers, you are probably ready to call it a night too. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.